This is episode 147. Today, we are going to talk about woodcock. And my guest and your guest is James O'Neill, who is in the final stages of finishing his research and his PhD dedicated to this fantastic bird. I'm really not going to say much more about the episode itself, just not to be redundant. And not, repeat twice what we already said in any episode. But one thing, though, that I will say now that you will hear in greater detail in the episode itself is just a shout out to National Association of Regional Game Councils, who not only supported that project substantially, financially and otherwise, but also really initiated this project. And I just want to recognize that that this is really what it should be, and this is really what we say so often, that hunting organizations are really the ones who are behind a lot of fantastic conservation action and research projects dedicated to conservation of birds and animals and so on. So this is one of those examples, and also shout out to Dan Curley, who mentioned James to me many years ago in 2019 when we were recording podcasts about NARGC. And yeah, 4 years later, James is on a podcast and talking about woodcock. So I'm going to leave you to enjoy this episode of the podcast. Just a reminder to subscribe to my newsletter if you haven't already. The link is in the description of the show, so get in there and click on the link and subscribe to the newsletter. And in this newsletter, you will not only get notifications about the new episodes of the podcast, but also much more. You will have a priority access to my blogs and articles and some other information, for example, about live events. Speaking about which, there is one live event that is going on in May. On the 27th of May, to be precise. It is called Environmental Debate, Live and Unscripted. It's in Oxfordshire, or Oxfordshire. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that to this day. One way or another, I am on a panel discussion, and I am going to talk about two of the probably most controversial subjects in the entire internet, which is nutrition and meat consumption. The topic is whether we can still consume meat while having a animal welfare and environment at the forefront of our minds. I'm sure it's going to be fun. Again, the link is in the description of the show, the link to Eventbrite. Get in there now and get yourself tickets at the early bird price. Okay? So 2 actions for you today. Subscribe to the newsletter if you haven't already. The link is in the description of the show, and there's profiles so you can have a look what you will be getting roughly once every 2 weeks. And also, if that's your thing and if you can travel to Oxfordshire and meet me there, then by all means do it. It's going to be fun, I'm pretty sure. So that's it for this introduction. And now, ladies and gentlemen, James O'Neill and woodcock. James, welcome to my show. Finally, we made
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's any chance to talk about the birds that I work with is always a great pleasure. So delighted.
Very good. I looked at the because this is we tried to make this podcast for some time, and I looked it up. And in 2019, I had on the episode 59 Dan Curlew from NRGC.
Yeah,
and he actually, for the first time, mentioned, you should talk with, James O'Neill. He's doing this woodcock research, and it would be great. And I think that I contacted you like a couple of weeks later, and we were just trying to make it happen, and because it was 2019. So, then all the mayhem, and finally, and then we kind of run into each other on various conferences and things. Stuff was happening, and it's yeah, we finally got to make it happen.
Yeah.
Listen, man, first off, I want to say that this is a proper way of doing podcasts, because I just went out to your place and we hang out together, had a dinner, and it was great. And you showed me actually what you're doing, how you're catching and ringing woodcock. So we get to that. I just want to say that it was a fantastic experience, and thanks for that. Thanks for the invitation. It was
very welcome.
The whole evening was just superb. James, so but for the benefits of our listeners, maybe you start from introduction, who you are, who you work for, and what is the research that you're doing, and then we take it from there.
Yeah. Okay. So at the moment, I'm a PhD student at University College Cork, and my research centres on the woodcock, which is a bird that we have in Ireland, and it's a very secretive, interesting bird to work on. And I've been working on this PhD project now for 4 years, just over 4 years now, and we're just coming up to the end. I'm planning to submit my thesis this coming summer. So,
Yeah.
Finally, it's been a long time coming, but no, it's been a fantastic project. Other than that, yeah, I'm just interested in nature, wildlife of all kinds, and interested in conservation, how we can sustainably manage the Irish countryside to benefit both, the people and the wildlife. Yeah.
Like for listeners, when I was at your home, it looks like a natural history museum. It was just awesome. Like, even if we haven't done anything and you haven't go out, it was worthy just to see all the specimens of the carnivorous plants and all the mice and all the other things that you have. It's so you can tell you're the naturalist, like a true, true naturalist.
I've got far too many interests. I don't know what to spend my time doing because I just like far too many things, as you say. And yeah, and I like to surround myself with all the things that I like.
Yeah, it's just like I'm the same. Listen, so tell me, I don't know whether to ask you a question like why woodcock, or maybe tell us something about woodcock. So let me combine these two questions into one. So why woodcock, and while you're at it, tell us a little bit about the woodcock. What is special about these birds and everything that people might need to know about woodcock? Because I presume there's a substantial portion of listeners who just kind of know there's a bird woodcock, but doesn't know much detail about it.
Yeah. Well, really, just to introduce the woodcock then, before I go on to why the woodcock. I like to describe it for people who ask me, what's a woodcock like? They've never heard of it. They don't know of it at all. I like to call it sort of a little small brown chicken with a big long beak. But I don't think that quite does it justice, because it is an absolutely fantastically beautiful bird. It's a member of the sandpiper family, which means that its closest relatives really are the curlews and the dunlins, the redshanks, the shorebirds that you see down on the beach and the mudflats. It's actually, it would have shared a very recent common ancestor with those birds, but rather than staying on the shoreline and on the mudflats like all of its relatives, it's actually moved inland to a forest and farmland environment, which means that it's kind of had to have some adaptations to its new lifestyle that many of its close relatives don't have. So, for example, to camouflage itself in the forest environment, it has this incredible plumage. And I just described it as a small brown chicken. It's so much more than that. It has incredible patterning of brown and cream and russet and chestnut and black and all these beautiful patterns across the feathers. And as I said, it's got a long beak, as you would expect from a bird in the sandpiper family, a very long straight beak. And then it's got sort of a little short tail that it likes to keep sort of cocked up in the air. And then it's got a pair of very big, powerful wings that are very, very strong. But it's not a very big bird, and it's also a very, very secretive bird. So that coloration for its camouflage, when it's sitting in the forest, I mean, they have the technique of predator avoidance that If they're approached by a predator, they just sit tight. They don't move. They just let their camouflage do the job for them. And you can nearly step on top of one of these birds before it finally flushes. And that's why I like to call them mini heart attacks as well, because the shock of when a woodcock explodes out of the leaf litter in front of you that you just never saw. And there's actually a lovely saying about trying to find a woodcock, that a wise man finds a woodcock by the glint of its eye, because that's basically the thing that stands out about it the most when you see it. So, I mean, that's just a basic description of the woodcock. There's a whole lot more that I could talk about in terms of its adaptations to its lifestyle, etc.
Yeah, of course. You're researching those birds, so we could probably record like a 6-hour long podcast about only starting talking about woodcock. But just just to set things like, so I presume they moved into the kind of like a woodland environment to avoid competition with other birds of its family.
Yeah, that's probably a pretty good hypothesis as to why they did that, because the beaches, the shorelines have got plenty of these long-legged, long-beaked birds that are probing for creatures in the mud, but the forest doesn't have a long-legged, long-beaked bird, and so the woodcock basically moved in to fill that niche. Kind of like there's only the best sort of analogy of a bird to the woodcock is the kiwi in New Zealand, which has a very similar lifestyle, except they can't fly, of course.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's actually very. Now, when you said it, that's a very good comparison. So why woodcock? Why did you like it? Just why woodcock? Why did you decide to do your PhD on woodcock?
So I suppose, like most people growing up, I mean, I was mad into birds growing up through my teens. Birds, insects, all kinds of wildlife, whatever. But I just wasn't all that familiar with the woodcock. As I say, like most people are not familiar with the woodcock. And I can remember the first time I ever saw a woodcock, and it was down in a little belt of trees just in a wet hollow near my home, where I grew up in Northern Ireland, near to Lough Neagh. And it just exploded out of the undergrowth, like I described, giving me a mini heart attack. And I just saw this ginger backside basically weaving through the trees and away. And I went to my dad and I said, I thought I just saw a woodcock. And he said, well, sounds like it. That would be that would fit the description all right. But for a while, again, that remained pretty much my only experience of a woodcock, because I just didn't know anything about how to see this species. And then when it came to the start of my bachelor's degree, 2015 or so, I began bird ringing, just because it was almost like a very natural thing for me to progress into with my interest and in birds and science and whatever. And there's quite a lot of specialized techniques to catching birds, mist nets and there's a lot of regulation and permits needed. So first of all, to be able to catch birds and to tag them, to ring them, and then on top of that, to be able to use various methods and to be able to prove that you know how to safely catch and release these birds. However, I was in contact, or I spent a summer working in Romania, actually, with a friend of mine from mid Wales, and he actually specialized in catching birds at night time on the fields with a hand net and a torch. And this didn't require any kind of extra licensing or permits or training. And so it was a very easy sort of method that I could get into. So he described this to me, and he told me all the sort of different sorts of birds that he would find and catch. Not the sort of birds that most people who do bird ringing in the daytime would encounter. and I thought this sounded absolutely fantastic. So as part of my training, then I began sort of getting out into my local fields, basically down where I'd seen that very first woodcock. Um, and I actually found that the fields around my home were absolutely full of woodcock, but you would never see them unless you were out at night with a torch. And my mind was blown. So that's how I begun. My woodcock journey really. It started with the ringing in a way, but I just very quickly became amazed by the bird itself, and the fact that so few people do know this species. I was able to then begin to show other people, and I was able to get other people enthused about this bird, and so that's really where it began. And so then that transitioned into the current PhD project, where there was a previous project going on with UCC and Woodcock, which was set up by the NARGC and the and some other folks, and one of my colleagues at UCC as well, Luke Harmon. He was instrumental in getting that project set up. But the researcher who was originally started doing that project, they unfortunately dropped out of the project, and that sort of left the project hanging a bit. So I finished my bachelor's degree a few years later. I'd already, every winter I was out catching a certain number of woodcock, so I'd already got quite good at the technique of catching and getting to know the bird already. So I'd heard about this project at UCC, and so I got in contact with the relevant people, and so we applied for more funding, and we got the project going again, which is great. And so that the rest is history. We got going with the next 4 years of woodcock research in Ireland.
This is a fantastic story, and we go into touch on the role of NRGC as well in this project, because after all, this is how I got in touch with you. This is where I heard for the first time about your project and what you do. I have a suspicion that I would hear about you anyway, but that was the first thing. Listen, man, I just want to focus for a second, or maybe longer than a second, on the technique of catching that bird, because you showed me how you do this, and I was absolutely blown away. So you were doing your thing, and I was kind of like a trailing in your wake, just watching what you do. And like woodcock is a game bird, right? So it is huntable bird for those who don't like the euphemism or whatever. So anyway, my point is that what you do is like so much more fun and so much more exciting way of catching woodcock than shooting it, that coming from a hunter perspective, why would anyone want to shoot them if you can do what you do? And like you said, and you can do catch and release, of course, and you can contribute to science by ringing them, measuring them, weighing them. When we were sitting at night on the edge of a field, and you were showing me, you measure beak length and the wing length and this and that. So it always reminds me like my shark fishing, where like a part of this was like, oh, you can now measure that shark and tag it and all these things. So I kind of like was completely on the same page. Like I get it. So like maybe talk us through the whole process of like how you go about catching them, and then once the bird is caught, all the steps that measuring, weighing, and all these things, and then what is happening with the data afterwards.
Yep, of course. Well, just really to start off about talking about the value of why I'm doing this. I'm not just going out and catching woodcock for the fun of it, although I have to say I really do find it a lot of fun.
Oh, dude.
Yeah, it's, as you say, the woodcock is a hunted species, and we can really never know enough about the species, for example, that we do hunt, because we always need to sort of keep tabs on how those species are doing and gather more information. And ringing has traditionally always been a very important way of doing that. So basically, we are putting little metal rings on the bird's legs. Each ring has got a unique inscription on the ring, and so anyone who ever in the future is able to recover that bird, or if they hunt it, or it's hit in the road, or it flies into a window, or someone finds it dead under a peregrine roost, they're able to report that number to the centralized organization, your ring or the BTO, and that then is traced back to where I originally ringed that bird. And so we can tell all sorts of things from that. Movement, for example, migratory paths, longevity, how long they live for, and how loyal a bird is to its wintering or breeding site as well, from year to year, etc. Things like that. And with enough birds ringed over the years, some very amazing overall pictures have been produced. There's a website that you can visit. I forget the exact name of it at the moment, but you can type in the name of any bird species, really, and it'll give you the locations of all recoveries, and where they were recovered in relation to where they were ringed. And you can see just these incredible patterns about showing sort of where birds from Scandinavia are migrating to, where birds are migrating to from Russia, etc. So it just gives an amazing picture of what's happening with these birds over the years. On top of that, we can record things like ratios of adults to juveniles, and keep track of that each year as well. The method of catching them, yes, as you say, it's a bit of a skill that you have to master. I probably made it look quite easy on the night that we were out, and
like anyone who has any sort of experience with wildlife knew straight away that you're displaying serious skill, So yeah. But maybe like someone who just like see the bird for the first, like, just. But yeah, man.
We actually went trying to catch them at halfway through March, so March 15th, I think it was about. And at this time, the woodcock are actually getting ready to migrate to the east. So the woodcock that overwinter here in Ireland, they migrate to breed in Scandinavia or Russia. And they have, at this time of year, what they call, the German word is Zugunruhe, which is no literal translation in English. And that basically means that they're jumpy, they're energetic, they're ready to go, they can't sit still. And so at this time of year, it is actually really quite difficult to catch them. But the birds behaved very well in the night we were out. But basically, as I said, we use a very bright torch and a hand net. So basically like a landing net that an angler would use. The technique is called lamping or dazzling. Now, it doesn't actually dazzle the bird. And so I don't really like that name, because the bird can clearly still see and it isn't blinded. It's not dazzled by the light. But what I like to say is that as I'm shining the torch at the bird, I initially find the bird using its eye shine and the reflectivity, or you're using a thermal imager, which is quite helpful in some environments. And when I shine the torch on the bird, I basically like to think that I'm hiding behind the light. The bird can't see the shape of me behind the light. And so the bird can't see me, essentially, but it can still hear me. So I might be 100 meters away when I get the light onto the bird. But I have to get close enough to the bird to be able to pop the net over it. So the long stalk commences, and I have to be absolutely silent, which is a problem in these wet, muddy, squelchy fields. One wrong move with the boot, and you'll make a big squelch and the mud will splatter everywhere, or you'll walk on a twig or a crackling leaf, and away the bird goes. So you have to be very soft with your feet, and a lot of it is about reading the bird's behavior. So a lot of the birds will do different things. I've kind of got to get different names for them. You've got the runners, the hoppers, the sit-stillers. And, you never know quite.
These are all scientific terms. Hoppers.
Yeah, very scientific. You basically have to act differently to each bird, and you have to read the bird's behavior and how you have to act in relation to that. So if the bird starts moving, I can move at the same time as it's moving when it's walking across the ground. But if it stops, I have to stop too. And so, it's just knowing the bird and how to get close to it. But eventually, basically, you're getting closer and closer to it. And the closer you get to it, the quieter you have to get. Because when you're right up close to it, it'll startle at the very, very tiniest movement. And then finally, I'm close enough to within striking distance, as it were, and I'm able to gently bring the net over the top of the bird and gently drop it on the bird, and it's caught at that stage. And then afterwards, I minimize handling time. I just to minimize the stress, obviously, because the welfare of the bird is very, very important. I attach the ring. I take the measurements that I need to, so things like the weight and the wing length and the bill measurement, the head length, the tail measurement as well, and then record it as an adult or a juvenile, and then finally release it into the night. And yes, as you say, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of sort of, as well as the important sort of scientific value of what we're doing. There's a lot of fun in actually sort of thrill of the hunt, as it were. But the nice thing is that I'm able to see the bird fly away by the end of it. And so maybe the next year I'll be able to catch that bird again, or somebody in Russia might shoot that bird and let me know that they've actually shot that bird, and then I get to know where this particular bird flew thousands and thousands of miles away to nest. And so that's a particularly engaging part of it as well, is not just the act, but the follow-up on what you get back from that.
Can you just tell us a few words about the migration of the birds? Because I didn't think we touched on this. So this is migratory bird, and there's a lot of discussion about as well that we touch on later about management of these birds, particularly in the UK, I think, because there are migratory populations and local. Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Yeah. So, as you said, basically in Ireland we have two main populations of woodcock. There's the migratory population, which comes here only for the winter. So these are breeding across a huge range of Eurasia. The total breeding range of the woodcock actually stretches from Atlantic islands, such as the Canary Islands and Madeira, which have a very strange and interesting little breeding population of woodcock on them. And then northern Spain and Ireland on the very eastern reaches, right across Eurasia to the Pacific coast of Russia. And so it's a very numerous bird and occupies a huge area in the breeding season. But come the winter, obviously most of Siberia and Scandinavia and northern Russia is not suitable for these birds because they can't deal with frozen weather. It just makes the ground too hard for them to be able to probe in the soil for worms. So they have to find milder climates. So they fan out in all directions on their migration, and an awful lot of birds would come to Ireland, basically because we're warm and we're wet and we have lots and lots of farmers' fields with lots and lots of worms. So we get huge numbers of woodcock into Ireland, and we don't actually know really how many there are, but we do know that there are a lot of them, even though people rarely see them. And that's just testament to how secretive they are. So that's the migratory population. And then in Ireland, we do have a breeding population as well, which is a topic of my research, trying to find out a little more about the status of how these birds are doing in Ireland. And they would breed in mainly the Midlands areas. So the Midlands bogs, and then north up to sort of Monaghan and Fermanagh and a little bit of Donegal, and then southwards to Waterford, Kilkenny, some in Wexford, and then sort of all areas in between. But they're quite noticeably absent from most of the west. So West Cork and Kerry wouldn't have breeding woodcock, even though there's a lot of actually quite suitable habitat with all the afforestation that's been going on. Yeah, and so just to comment on their migratory strategy, they don't actually migrate at all. They are resident in the same, as far as we know, they're resident in the same area their whole entire lives. So in the winter, then in Ireland, we have a mixture of native breeding birds and migratory woodcock from the east.
So I gotta ask you this question because there's a lot of debate over hunting local versus migrant populations, and discussion about the different conservation status of one versus the other. So as a woodcock expert, like, is the person who knows the land, sort of, this is their land, they walk their land, are they able to tell migrant from local individual woodcock?
If you have a specimen of a woodcock in your hand, you would not be able to tell the difference between a local one and a migrant one. They are, for all intents and purposes, indistinguishable. Now, you can maybe make inferences based on whether you know that there are resident birds in the area during the breeding season, but you couldn't say with any confidence whether a bird that is just flushed, for example, or that has been shot and you have in your hand is a resident or migrant. I
Okay.
certainly.
So even not based on their location. So like, in this area of the farm there are only resident woodcock.
No, because you can never be confident that there won't be migrant birds mixed in there.
So let's approach this from different. So are you able to say like, oh, these are only migrants because there were never local resident birds there?
You could, to some extent. For example, in West Cork, where I am now, we don't have any breeding birds to speak of. There might be some on the Beara Peninsula. But other than that, West Cork is pretty, or I should say, breeding birds are pretty absent in West Cork. So obviously, any bird that is here in the wintertime has to have migrated from somewhere. Now, there exists then the question, well, could that have migrated from Russia? Or is it maybe an Irish bird that's doing a bit of moving about, say, in response to cold weather, which we know that they do. For example, if it's very, very cold in the Midlands, some of the resident birds will have to make cold weather movements to the west to take advantage of the warmer weather. So you still can't say with any confidence whether it's a true migrant or an Irish bird.
Yeah, gotcha. So it's migrant, but you don't know how far it migrated.
Yes.
It might have migrated from a different county.
Yes.
And that clarifies a lot. Is there any indication or any chance that those migratory birds will stop migrating if they have, with the climate change, like you said, they migrate because in Russia and Siberia just is too cold for them? But is there, Are there any indications that as the climate warms, they may stop migration and just become resident wherever they are?
That's a very good question, and it is my suspicion that that is what we might begin to see. Because they come to Ireland because they like the mild, wet conditions that we have, which are good for finding food. But actually, it was the year of 2021, autumn 2021, that I noticed some interesting things going on. So there's a network of woodcock ringers all across Europe. And in particular interest was the news coming out of Estonia that year that there were fantastic numbers of juveniles in the country coming through on migration, which indicated a good breeding year. And yet in West Cork, numbers of juveniles were way down. We were catching in December for tagging, and numbers of juveniles were way down. So we were wondering, well, what's going on here? And so it turns out that it was very mild on the coasts of Scandinavia that year, and there were far more woodcocks staying over in Norway, on the coast of Norway and Sweden, rather than flying across the North Sea. Why would you fly across the North Sea if you don't have to? It's very energetically demanding. And the all the birds that we were catching in West Cork, these were all adults, and this was, we think, coming about because adults are very loyal to their wintering grounds. So where they spend their first winter, for example, as a juvenile, that's where they'll always come back to, no matter what, pretty much. And so these were the diehard adults that were just coming back to their winter grounds that they'd always known. But the juveniles, they hadn't settled in a place. They'd yet to choose their final wintering location. And so they were, because it was so mild that autumn, they just stayed where it seemed mild to them, which happened to be the coast of Scandinavia. And then what happened later that winter? Big cold snap, and there were a lot of dead and dying woodcock, and a lot of them made emergency journeys across the North Sea. They weren't prepared for it. I'm sure there was high mortality, and on the east coast of England there were huge reports of enormous numbers of woodcock that were struggling in the cold weather, and they'd just come in off the sea, and so yeah, this kind of thing I think we can expect to become more common, and it, down the line, who knows, it may well end up changing the densities of where woodcock overwinter in Europe if there's any kind of regularity to new milder temperatures in the winter. As I say, this is all based on just what we observed. I'd love to collect some proper data on this through multiple years to try and understand how different weather conditions in different years actually affect the movement of juveniles compared to adults. But that was something very interesting that I noticed in that year.
Listen, I have a question that I ask many times on the podcast, people who are dealing with birds, and this is to do with ringing. And what is your take on opinions that ringing takes away wildness of the bird, that the bird that get caught, it messes with its brain, and there are also sort of welfare considerations, that would be considered a exploitation of the birds for conservation purposes, but still. And we had that conversation when I was over. Like, I personally don't like that every photo of a bird you see is a photo of the bird that rings. So it's like, God damn it, they ringed all of them, right? For which you responded like, it is probably bias there that people are photographing birds to see what's on the ring, and that's why you see so many ringed birds. But overall, as a naturalist, as a person who loves nature, loves those birds, what is your take on, where is the balance between, leaving them alone and messing with them all the time and putting bird, rings and tags and other things on them?
Well,
Not only woodcock, right? You would like in general. I'm speaking like
Yeah, all
in
birds.
general terms.
Yeah, I mean, since I'm working in this field and I'm, a ringer and a tagger myself, uh, I know firsthand the value that we get back from this work. And, I can, I'm also a photographer of birds. And so I can fully understand actually sort of well, I mean, it really is an emotional reaction. That saying that it takes away from their wildness, and I get that, and it might ruin your nice picture when there's a big colored ring on a bird's leg, but you know that's aesthetics, and there are plenty of unringed birds that I can also photograph, but as I say, there's so much scientific value that comes out of this work. And, in no way is every bird in Ireland ringed. The ringing community in Ireland is very, very small, slightly larger in the UK, but still small. And so, it is a very, very tiny proportion of all birds that ever get ringed. And in terms of, welfare, for example, we we do adhere to very, very strict guidelines as to what we can do, how we do it, how we act around the birds. And really, we want to minimize all kinds of any kind of mortality or morbidity associated with ringing, because that's not in our interests to do that as well. What we're trying to do is study these birds behaving normally, and try to, understand actual facts about these birds, and we can't do that if we conduct ourselves in a way that is going to affect the birds adversely. So we are very stringently trained as well in all these guidelines and conditions of our work. For example, just to say that when we're tagging birds, so the difference between ringing and tagging is that when you're ringing a bird, you put a little metal ring in their leg, as I described, but when you're tagging a bird, you would be putting on something else, for example, a GPS logger to track its movements, or a radio transmitter, so that you can follow it with a radio receiver antenna. When you're attaching those to birds, we aren't allowed to put on tags that are any more than 3% of a bird's body weight, which is much less than what a bird's body weight would vary by naturally, just because it's putting on fat and losing fat naturally. So the effects on the birds aren't nil, but they are negligible, and they're small enough so that we can actually get proper scientific valuable data out of it.
Okay, that's a very sensible approach to this issue. Obviously, there are like types of I saw ducks with a nasal saddles or beak saddles and bleeding, and there's like.
I don't think we're allowed
these
to.
Are the things.
Yeah, I don't think we're allowed to put those on in Britain and Ireland. Every country has a different standard as well to their conduct in bird research, and I would say that Britain and Ireland, which is the bird research in Britain and Ireland, is all under the umbrella of the British Trust for Ornithology, and they have probably the strictest guidelines on bird welfare and research in the whole world, I'd say.
Have you had to go through the an ethics committee for your research or anything, like get any approval of
Yes,
putting
yes.
ring?
Yeah. So I mean, just to start off, I had to get all my permits from the BTO in terms of catching, ringing, and tagging birds, and I also had to get permits from the NPWS to be able to do that. And then on top of that, yes, I went through the ethics committee at the university, who, sort of gave the final go ahead into what I could do.
Is that a chore, or was it like a friction?
It's just paperwork, really.
Okay. We had that like and I said it to you, and I'm gonna repeat that part of me, like on one end, it's like, oh, leave the bird alone. You're putting these tags, you're putting all these things. Those poor birds are going with these things, and I don't like it. But then when I hear that the researcher has to go through paperwork and all these committees, then the another part of me is like, just get on with it. Just put the goddamn tag on the bird. And, it's valuable work. So I myself have like a very contradicting views on the on this thing. So, but I guess it's always interesting to consider at least. Um, Listen, James. Here's we mentioned at the beginning that NRRGC, which is National Association for Regional Game Councils, had substantial. I don't know if it's substantial, but it has a contribution to this project. So I would like to hear how they're contributing to this project, how um, how this is going, and do they have vested interest in this or not, or is it like completely pro bono? And from this, this is kind of like a loaded question, but I have to ask it. What's your take on hunting the woodcock? Right, you love the woodcock. This is fantastic bird. All these things that you already said, and then someone gets a shotgun and blast it. Right, blast it out of the air. Poor bird. Um, for disclosure, I don't have anything personally against shooting woodcock, as long as its population is doing okay, which is something that you, I presume, is to your research. But then there's like a small little bird. I say, is it even worthy to how many you need to get a meal? I mean, that's my view. I would, I am pro hunting, but I wouldn't cry if we couldn't hunt woodcock. But having said that, I understand there is some history and the tradition attached to hunting woodcock. So yeah, take it away. I just kind of like open the stage for this like a slightly difficult subject, but I'm curious, of the contributions of NRRGC to the project and your views on hunting.
Yeah. Well, look, NARGC really were the guys who kicked off the project. They really approached UCC from the outset, and were asking for this kind of research to be done, which I think is kind of unique in an Irish context, because not an awful lot of research into game birds has been done in Ireland before, and so it's quite progressive. And
Yeah.
basically,
NRRGC is scoring points in my book recently. They're doing a lot of good work. Now you're saying that was actually their initiative.
yeah, pretty much. And right through this project, they've been extremely supportive. They've been, well, financially, they've been able to fund a lot of the particularly expensive parts of the research, the tags, the analysis for the for samples that we send off to the lab, etc., and also getting a lot of gun clubs involved in contributing to the research, sending in feather samples, for example, that from birds that they'd shot that we want to get analysed, and also getting volunteers involved in the breeding woodcock surveys that we've conducted as well. So their contribution has not been small at all, and it's only because of them that this research is able to go ahead in the first place. And you mentioned vested interest. Well, of course they're interested in the woodcock. It's a very important hunted species here in Ireland, and I think becoming even more so important, because yourself, the state of the Irish countryside over the past few decades has only been getting worse for our birds, and not just our birds, our native birds, but released pheasants, for example. just swathes of the countryside is not suitable for pheasant anymore. And so clubs can be releasing hundreds of pheasants, uh, hoping to shoot a few on down the line when the season comes around, and they're just none, because either there's nothing in the countryside for them and predators have picked them off, or they've had to move somewhere else where they can find some food. So, you know, basically, there's no hard data to back this up, but the impression among the hunting community in Ireland is that, as pheasants are becoming more and more scarce and people are getting less return on what they've released, the woodcock and other wild game such as the snipe are becoming more important as a hunted species. And so, where that comes with a certain responsibility as well to ensure that the hunting of these wild species is sustainable down the line. And really, that's where this research has come into play. And
I love it. Because you just said exactly what we're saying all the time, that it's in a hunter's interest to have a thriving and healthy population with harvestable surplus. I know that many people just cringed when I used the word harvest, but that kind of move us to the another part of my question, and I'm pretty sure that you can openly and honestly talk about, what's your deep down, right? Like a deep down feelings on those birds being hunted.
yeah, well, look, I'm not a hunter. I've never been a hunter. I'd maybe be interested in taking up deer stalking at some stage down the line. But I don't think I could ever shoot a bird myself. I'm just, I like seeing live birds personally. But I think I can understand why a person would go out and hunt woodcock during the open season, because really, I mean, the majority of gun club members in Ireland, they treat the woodcock with some reverence. A lot of people would find it kind of contradictory that such a bird, they go out and hunt it, but they also respect it a lot. And, hunters call them, the queen of the forest, or the king of all game birds. And there is a lot of respect for the woodcock in Ireland. And so, I think a lot of the interest in hunting woodcock is really, number one, about the dog work, and number two, just getting out and seeing these birds. If you get a shot at them, then you're that's a bonus. But even just seeing them and hearing the flush of their wings and seeing the dog working the hedges is that's the real reward. And at the end of the day, if you get one or two for the pot, then that's just a cherry on top. So I can really understand that. And to be honest, I'm fascinated by the dog work. I'm really, really interested in how, the different breeds approach woodcock in different ways. You've got the pointers and the setters, which are able to, find the bird by scent and then point them. And then probably the most popular breed that you'd use to hunt woodcock would be the Springer Spaniel, which is, very good in the cover. You send it through and it flushes out the bird in a flash. And yet, if you're going to hope to have a shot at the bird, you have to be quick like that, and you have to have your wits about you. Now, as I say, I'm not a hunter. This is all just what I've seen and what I've heard from the hunters that I've been talking to. So
No,
from that side
you
of
are you are a hunter, man. Like, you are a hunter. I saw you in action. Okay, like, if that's not hunting, I don't know what is. That's
all right. Put it this way, I don't hunt to kill. So
there you go. Catch and release hunter.
Catch and release. But I can totally understand the interest from that side of things, where it is the thrill of the chase and all the work that you put into training your dog and getting out there and I haven't handled the shotgun before, but I can imagine you need to be a dab hand to shot a woodcock. But again, as I say, I could never shoot a bird myself. That said, I have eaten woodcock, and it is very tasty. and as you say, it's a small bird. I would say one woodcock makes one meal, two breasts and two legs. And so it's not that small. When it gets down to the level of snipe, and even more so jack snipe, that's when I'd consider whether it was worth shooting that in terms of for a meal.
Okay, so I just learned something. I'm looking more in a more accepting eye for the on the hunting now. That's fantastic. Listen, tell us a little bit about the where the project is right now, and are there any results that you're able to talk about, or is it all secret until its final submission and publication of papers? Where like just give us like where you are right now, and are there any preliminary results that you can share with us?
Yeah, so as I say, it's been a long project. There's been basically 3 or 4 years of data collection. I was almost starting from scratch. The guys who'd been doing the project before me had already collected a little bit of survey data of breeding woodcock, but other than that, yeah, I was pretty much starting from scratch. So there was a lot of work to do, and it's not an easy species to work with. It's nocturnal. It's a very secretive species, so it needs some specialist methods and some very strong will to be able to go out on stormy nights and catch this bird and
You're like
study
a
this
shift
bird. Yeah, yeah, the woodcock shift.
exactly.
Yeah, and so it has been a lot of work to get to this point, but we are starting to see some really nice results coming through. I'm currently in the write-up of the thesis and in the write-up of papers to be published. We haven't published any papers yet, but I mean, basically a lot of the research is very basic stuff, really, because we don't know very much about the woodcock and its status and its ecology in Ireland. So we have started with the very basics. And a lot of the project was kind of trying to focus on the impacts of hunting on the woodcock, but that's hard to do unless you already know the basics. So a lot of it is just finding out basic ecology of woodcock in Ireland. So there are really three main elements to this project so far. The number one is the breeding surveys, where we over the course of 3 different years, and I should say that COVID happened in the middle of this project, which really put a spanner in the works in some ways. So, look, we did what we could, but I have to say that it worked fairly well anyway. But yes, we got volunteers to go out and survey for displaying male woodcock in the breeding season. So what happened there was volunteers who, by the way, I should say, came from all walks of life. They were NARGC members, they were hunters, shooters, gun club members, they were Birdwatch Ireland members, they were other folks at the university, they were just general members of the public. I pushed it hard on social media, and all kinds of people went out and surveyed for woodcock, and I'm very, very grateful for everyone who did, because every site surveyed across the country added another bit of knowledge to the project. And I have to say particular thanks to the NRGC, to the NPWS, and to Birdwatch Ireland, and to the Northern Irish organisations, BTO Northern Ireland and RSPB, for pushing the word about doing these surveys as well. And so people go out and survey these displaying male woodcock. Now, displaying male woodcock probably presents the best opportunity to see a woodcock. As I say, they're very, very secretive birds, so they stay hidden in the forest most of the day. But in the evening, male woodcock want to display themselves to the females. They want to advertise themselves to the females. So about 20 minutes past sunset in May and June, well, more than that, from about now, actually, mid March through to mid July, you get the males begin to display. And as I say, 20 minutes after sunset, they suddenly appear in the sky above the forest, and they fly these great big circuits across the trees. They cover a huge area, and they have this very interesting way of flying where it's like a double wing beat and flickering wings. And they fly with their head cocked up quite high and their beak pointing down and their legs dangling. So they're very distinctive. You can't mistake them for anything else. And they have this distinctive call that they repeat every few seconds. And it's like a series of grunts and then a little squeak. So they go, and it's, once you know that sound, you won't mistake it for anything else. And so basically, from the counts, you're able to then work out a rough density of how many males you have, say, within the kilometre squared around where you did the survey. And so we took everyone's survey results. There were plenty of people who didn't see any woodcock on their survey. And, I'm very grateful to those people who went out on multiple nights through the season and endured biting midges and other insects and mosquitoes in the forest in the evening, and didn't see any woodcock and still reported the results for me, because those negative surveys are almost just as important as the surveys which did see woodcock. And then from that data, I was able to build a species distribution model, which allowed me to estimate where in Ireland you get breeding woodcock, what kind of densities you get, and an overall population estimate, and also what factors drive that population. So we found that climate was really quite an important one. And there's a bit of speculation as to why climate is so important for the distribution of woodcock in Ireland. Nothing solid on that yet, but it came out as a very important factor, as well as that habitat. Obviously, the more forest habitat you got, the more likely you were going to find woodcock.
Yeah. And so those displaying woodcocks, these are residents.
Those are the residents. Yes,
those are the residents. So when they're displaying, they're then bred females and then females. So the same thing, I guess, is happening in Russia or somewhere.
Yes,
and then they're bred females, and then females migrate to lay eggs and raise chicks after migration.
No, well, the displaying woodcock that were seen as part of the survey here in Ireland, they were displaying to females, which then would be nesting here in Ireland and raising chicks in Ireland.
Okay, so they're not migrating to raise chicks. No. They're migrating just to find the food and all these things.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So woodcock migrate away. The migratory woodcock migrate away in mid-March to April, and they go over to Russia or Scandinavia, and they do all that displaying and raising of chicks over there.
When can we expect, the final results and some papers published? I would love to put the link to those papers in my newsletter. So hint, folks, subscribe to Tommy Soudal's newsletter. We'll be, stay in touch on this research. Do you have any time frame?
Hopefully, get them submitted later this year and published as soon as we can after that. I'd like to see them out this year, 2022, hopefully. But yeah, there's some there's a whole lot more to than I've described.
Yeah, like we said, we could probably spend 6 hours talking about woodcock and that research.
Absolutely. I didn't even get into the GPS tagging and some of the incredible secrets that we've discovered about how they use the Irish landscape in the winter.
You know what? I think that once you have the papers out, we should do this again.
Yes.
And on just do more because I bet you there's going to be huge interest in this episode and everything that we said. So let's just do it again.
Absolutely. I'm up for it again. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm going to take you up on that. So folks, subscribe to Tommy's Outdoors podcast, wherever you're listening to that podcast, on Spotify or Apple. Leave 5-star rating for the Woodcock and subscribe to the newsletter. James, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It's been great to talk.